The chapel over there is deserted, and I can tell you why, because my uncle was there when all that happened back then. It started when people said that Bergmeier was in league with the devil. He was the richest farmer in the whole village and had literally maltreated his workers to death. In ice and snow, he sent his servants up into the forest, and in all weathers he had the oxen harnessed and drove them across his fields. Time and again, one of his men never returned from the forest, or fell ill and died from the drudgery. People soon said that Bergmeier was collecting souls for hell in exchange for the wealth he would then receive from the devil. It didn't help that his own brother was the priest in the village. Instead, things got worse and worse with Bergmeier, until people were already wishing that he would finally kick the bucket. And exactly this wish was fulfilled. At some point, when he was standing in the field again and berating his people for being too lazy in his eyes, he suddenly grabbed his heart and fell to the ground lengthways. He was dead, and no one had really mourned him. That's how much people had hated him. 3 days later he was buried, and everyone thought that was the end of it, and that everything would be fine now that his son was in charge, 'cause he was a righteous guy. But it didn't take that long. Then people in the inn started telling each other scary stories. The old Bergmeier was back, they said. He's walking through the forest again and looks over his fields. Just like before, he checks whether his servants are working properly. At first, those were just stories that nobody wanted to believe, but everyone knew that if anyone ever came back from the dead to continue tormenting his people, it would be old Bergmeier. He has to bring the devil 100 more souls before he's allowed to go, they said. Most people thought it was all silly talk, and the authorities didn't give a damn either. But one day, his widow and son came to the priest and told him that the old man was now haunting their farm. Sometimes he would sit up in the hayloft and whine downstairs, or he would appear in the far corners of the barn and glare at you with devilish eyes. The cattle were already so frightened that they could no longer give milk, and the horses were sweating and could no longer be calmed. The priest then went himself to see what was wrong. The men from the village accompanied him with their pitchforks so that nothing would happen to him. My uncle was one of those men, and they actually found the evil spirit out in the field at dusk. As soon as the old Bergmeier saw his brother, he shouted at him and cursed so much that the men immediately put their heads down. But the priest was not intimidated. You could tell how difficult it was for him to see his own brother before him as a ghost. He began to pray without hesitation. Meanwhile, old Bergmeier cursed more and more. He became weaker as he did so, first falling to his knees and finally collapsing. It must have been a terrible spectacle. But just when everyone thought that this was the end for him, he suddenly straightened up again and looked at the priest. He looked him straight in the eye and spoke in a strange voice. "You think you can get rid of me, but I'm not leaving until your family's debt is paid." Everyone was horrified by the voice. My uncle had never heard such a terrible voice before or since. For years he had talked about it again and again. The old Bergmeier slumped down and never got up again. But the priest died too. He briefly clutched his heart and then fell down, so that the two brothers lay side by side. The old Bergmeier was immediately laid back in his grave, and the priest was buried 3 days later near this chapel. Until then, it was customary for clergymen from our village to find their final resting place there. For a while, all was well in the village, but at some point, the bells from the chapel began to ring. You could hear them ringing again and again, even though no one was there and the new priest had the chapel locked up. The bells can still be heard today. People say it's the old priest. The curse is said to have been passed on to him by his brother, and now he has to collect the remaining souls. He has to settle the Bergmeier family's debt. Now he rings the bells so that people will come to the chapel. That's why it is completely deserted now, and that's why I'm moving on quickly. It's already getting dark.